You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Wednesday, February 21st, 2018, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Welcome to the program. We're really glad to have you here for our weekly look at the reform of marijuana laws. And speaking of that, we got a very special guest in the first hour of our program today, Keith Stroup, the founder of the National Movement to Reform Marijuana Laws, NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Been around for over 45 years and still going strong, even stronger these days with the addition of political director Justin Stroup and the new executive director Eric Altieri. Keith will be joining us for a two-part discussion where we cover a lot about the future of marijuana legalization. In particular, how is legalization going to proceed now that we've gotten past the low-hanging fruit of the coastal initiative states and have to start moving inland to some states where we'll have to pass legalization through more conservative state legislators. What will be on the table when it comes to negotiation and compromise, when it comes to NORML's point of view, things like home grow and the right to go to pot shops and so forth? What will legalization look in the future? We'll talk about that. Plus, we'll take a look at what's happening in legalization right now with the rise of what we called cannabis carpetbaggers, the MBAs and the money folks coming into the cannabis industry who don't know a whole lot about our history and culture. It's a great discussion, so that'll be in the bottom half of this hour. Also coming up in this half hour, we've got our cannabis headline news, some news from the Department of Veterans Affairs, as well as the U.S. Congress. We'll also go international and take a look at Israel and the United Kingdom and an anti-democratic proposal in Oklahoma because of the fear that people might legalize marijuana. Oh, my goodness. Then in our Reefer Madness Debunked segment, we take a look at Representative Pete Sessions of Texas, how he is the biggest roadblock to federal reform right now, and just what kind of crazy stuff he believes. That's coming up in this first half hour. Then stay tuned for hour two, our Toker Talk Radio. We got plenty more stories to cover that happened in the previous week that we need to discuss here on the Marijuana Agenda. Check out our website at mjagenda.com. And now let's get to the cannabis headline news.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority Founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at MarijuanaMoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for the week of Wednesday, February 21st, 2018. I'm Russ Belville. Despite repeated claims to the contrary, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs is now admitting that it can, quote, look at marijuana as an option for treating veterans, end quote. The stance, which comes in the form of new content uploaded to a VA webpage last week, was first noted by Marijuana Majority and contrasts with a letter that Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin sent to members of Congress in December, less than 2 months ago. Quote, federal law restricts VA's ability to conduct research involving medical marijuana or to refer veterans to such projects, end quote, he claimed at the time. There have been no changes to federal cannabis laws in the interim. The update to the webpage comes as Shulkin and the department are under increasing pressure on medical cannabis and completely unrelated issues. Senator Cory Gardner, Republican of Colorado, announced on Thursday that he has lifted holds on certain Department of Justice nominees as a show of good faith for continued positive conversations with DOJ leadership, including Deputy Assistant Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and the acting U.S. Attorney for Colorado, aimed at finding a path forward that respects states' rights and clarifies the DOJ priorities regarding marijuana enforcement. Quote, because we have had positive conversations, I have decided to lift my holds on the Assistant Attorney General for National Security Security, United States attorneys, and United States Marshals as an act of good faith. My holds on all other DOJ nominees will remain in place as discussions continue, end quote. Senator Gardner's holds on other DOJ nominees will continue as he works toward a solution that protects Coloradoans' rights. Senator Gardner also remains committed to the bipartisan work he has been leading to find a legislative solution to the issue. People in Israel who use cannabis in public will not be subject to criminal proceedings until they are caught for the fourth time, according to a public security ministry bill approved by the Ministerial Committee for Legislation on Sunday. The Jerusalem Post reports that enforcement will focus on the public use of cannabis. Those caught for the first time will be fined 1,000 shekels, about $282, twice that when caught for the second time. On the third occurrence, the case will be closed under a conditional agreement under which the offender agrees not to smoke again. And on the fourth occasion, criminal proceedings will be opened. The bill, spearheaded by Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan, still has to undergo 3 votes in the Knesset before it can become law. Meanwhile, the Israeli government failed to follow through on previous hints that it would approve of medical cannabis exports, leaving licensed producers facing millions of dollars in crop losses. Marijuana Moment reports that lawmakers in the United Kingdom are expected to debate medical cannabis legislation on Friday. The text of the proposal from Member of Parliament Paul Flynn of the Labour Party is still being drafted, but is anticipated to be far-reaching in scope and reschedule cannabis under British law. Recent UK press reports have focused on the case of Alfie Dingley, a 6-year-old boy whose family is seeking government approval for him to use cannabis to treat severe epilepsy. The government of Prime Minister Theresa May of the Conservative Party rejected the family's appeal this week. Members of various parties, including Conservatives, tore into the government's position of refusing to let a suffering child access helpful medicine. In remarks on the House floor on Tuesday, Flynn advised Dingley's family to disregard criminal prohibition and provide him with the cannabis he needs. Quote, "I would urge them to break the law because the law in this case is an ass," end quote, he said. A proposal in Oklahoma to make it more difficult for citizens to enact laws by petition is apparently being driven by a fear of marijuana legalization. Tulsa World reports that term-limited Representative John Enns, a Republican of the 41st District, is proposing legislation that would alter Oklahoma's citizen initiative process by imposing an increase in the number of registered voters needed to get an initiative on the ballot, as well as requiring a minimum threshold of signatures gathered from each Oklahoma county. Quote, "A lot of what's going around in these other states, like legalization of recreational marijuana, has been done through initiative petition," Enns said in explaining his bill to the House Rules Committee on Tuesday. And constituents are like, "We don't want to see that happen in Oklahoma," end quote. This summer, Oklahomans will vote on Question 788, a citizens' initiative to legalize medical marijuana. Last month, the Sooner poll found 62% of Oklahomans in favor. This is your Cannabis Headline News for the week of Wednesday, February 21st, 2018. I'm Russ Belville.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. The Marijuana Agenda free podcast is available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, SoundCloud, and on our Facebook page at MJ Agenda. Free video archives are available at the Radical Russ channel on YouTube. Help keep this media free by making a donation at paypal.me/radicalruss. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
What are you people? On dope?
Learn more at mjagenda.com. Research has shown that states that allow adult access to marijuana have rates of drug overdose deaths far lower than the national average. Medical marijuana access is also correlated with doctors prescribing far fewer opioid painkillers and less opioid use by patients. If the government is serious about declaring a national emergency over opioids, it's time to end the failed federal prohibition on marijuana.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb.com. City of Portland permit number 17-159855.
Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death. Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. If the hideous monster Frankenstein came face to face with the monster of marijuana, he'd drop dead of fright.
You know, it's not easy trying to debunk 80 years of anti-marijuana propaganda in a 1-hour podcast, but let's try. It's time for the Marijuana Agenda's Reefer Madness Debunked.
Well, today on Reefer Madness Debunked, we want to take a look back at Representative Pete Sessions out of Texas. No, we're not talking about Jeff Sessions this time, and there is no relation between the Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the House Republican from Texas, Pete Sessions. The problem with Pete Sessions is that he is the chair of a very powerful committee in the House, the House Rules Committee, and with his chairmanship of that committee, he is able to block numerous pro-marijuana amendments that are being offered by various congressmen, like my Congressman Earl Blumenauer offering an amendment to protect the state legal medical cannabis operations, blocked by Sessions. Any to protect the legalized marijuana is blocked by Sessions. Banking access, blocked. IRS 280E, blocked. Anything we want to do is not going to get through this guy, Pete Sessions. As the chairman of the committee, he can control what gets debate in that committee. And so if it doesn't make it through that committee, it doesn't make it to the House floor. It doesn't go anywhere. And the problem with Sessions, of course, is that he's incredibly reefer mad. He may be the most reefer mad federal elected official we have. And that's including an administration that's got Jeff Sessions in it. So I don't say this lightly, but Pete Sessions just might be the craziest guy. Let me give you a taste of Pete Sessions. He spoke, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and was talking about marijuana being the gateway drug, and he's known people that died of heroin addiction. They started on marijuana, just some crazy stuff. Let me play you the full clip of this so you get the full idea of just how reefer mad this guy is. Pete Sessions and his strong opinion on drugs.
I, as probably everybody in this room knows, have a strong opinion on drugs, illegal drugs, alcohol. I spend a lot of time at not only being a parent, but around parents, members of my own scout troop, good guys, went to college, ran across marijuana, became addicted. Marijuana is an addictive product, and the merchants of addiction make it that way. They make it for addiction. They make it to where our people, our young people, become addicted to marijuana and keep going. And there's massive amounts of evidence that suggests that our young people, many of them that get into heroin, methamphetamines, and a lot of other things, begin not only with marijuana, but by addiction. And I have parents that come to me that are lost. They have a child that they lost right in front of them because they were out with kids and everybody thinks it's okay. It's not okay. And the time you have a son that's 15, 16, or 17 years old that drops out of life, that goes to heroin. And I have 2 boys in our scout troop that did that after going to college. Their kids just came across this and thought it wouldn't impact them. It's a national tragedy. We have an opioid addiction problem. We had 60,000 opioid-addicted children born in this country, and 2/3 of the mom will be dead in 2 years. And what do? We go and politically push this garbage. Illegal drugs, garbage. The governor of California said, who's going to want to work? We're all high. Had a guy the other day drive his car up in California, ended up second floor of a dentist's office. I'm sure he just had a beer. I don't know what he had. They claims it was narcotics. I didn't say it was marijuana, but it's drugs. We have an addiction problem, and marijuana is the beginning of the addiction. And I have a problem with it. I have a problem as a parent, have a problem as a guy, and I admit my problem is I've never smoked a marijuana cigarette, never had one in my hand. And I admit that's a problem, but it's not a foreign object to me. My best friend in high school spent 25 years in prison. I helped get him out from an addiction problem. And it started with marijuana and ended up in cocaine. So these are hard issues. We do have strong feelings. But as a parent that has a 17-year-old son, and as a parent who has a son that's a 29-year-old third-year medical school student that's dealing with an emergency room as a third-year medical school student who said, Dad, you would not believe how many people come in to the hospital looking for drugs in Amarillo, Texas. And it bothers me. And I think that we're missing it politically when we have people that don't see addiction as a problem. And I hope we do.
That's Congressman Pete Sessions from Amarillo, Texas, who's the head of the House Rules Committee that's blocking numerous amendments. The reporting in Marijuana Moment points out that he has blocked the marijuana business access to banks, blocking military veterans to receive medical cannabis recommendations, blocking the ability of marijuana businesses to take standard tax deductions, and so forth. So this is the only way now the prohibitionists can succeed, because we're starting to get enough bipartisan support, especially on medical cannabis issues, that we can pass these things through the House and the Senate and get them signed. So the only possible way to block them is to just not even have the debate on the issue, something that should seem very familiar to the kids in Florida these days who are trying to get a debate on their issue and got shot down as well. Pardon the expression on that one. The veterans need this access. The banking issue is a matter of public safety, and yet we've got conservatives out there like this Pete Sessions who are blocking our ability to make progress, to make democratic progress on this issue. And I wanted to highlight in particular something that Sessions said that was the most reefer mad. He spoke to the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and let me just read the quote. Didn't have any audio on this one, but I'll read the quote for you. He says, quote, "I referred to marijuana as merchants. This is merchants of addiction. They are making it more powerful and more powerful and more powerful. When I went to high school in 1973, I graduated. Marijuana, on average, is 300 times more powerful. That becomes an addictive element for a child to then go on to the next thing." My God, 300 times more powerful. Oh. I gotta find some of this Amarillo, Texas weed. Oh my goodness. All right. We can debunk this in either direction on the timeline. Let's go back, or let's start from now, right? In the marijuana shops that are within walking distance of this studio, right here at Delta 9 House and Studios, I can purchase marijuana flower. I looked up the menu today that's as high as 28.9% THC content. So if that marijuana at 28.9% THC is 300 times more powerful than what Sessions could get in 1973, that tells me that the 1973 high school stoners in Amarillo, Texas were toking on joints with 0.096% THC. 0.096. In other words, weed that's about 1/3 the high of industrial hemp, which is at 0.3% THC. Take industrial hemp, make it 1/3 as high, and that's what Sessions claims they were smoking in 1973. I find it hard to believe Cheech and Chong were smoking industrial hemp that was 1/3 as potent. Or let's just look at it the other direction. Let's go back to the 70s. The federal government's potency monitoring program started monitoring in 1975, so we'll have to fudge a little bit on the year. But in 1975, the average arithmetic cannabinoid average of domestic cannabis samples on their report was 1.99% THC. 1.99. So if the marijuana today is 300 times more powerful, that means that we've got to be smoking 597% THC weed. Never mind that 597% potency of anything is physically impossible. Hey, even if we give them a break and talk about concentrates that are 77%, we're still talking industrial hemp in 1973.
Let's get out of here. I have some really good weed back at the hotel.
Oh, these crazy reefer mad. And the thing is, potency, when it comes to marijuana, is irrelevant because it's non-toxic. We worry about more potent opioids or more potent alcohol because you can overdose and die on it. More potent marijuana just means you smoke less of it, and that's actually a good thing. Better for your lungs. Jeez. All right, let's get some anti-drug PSA, and then Keith Stroup is next. If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net.
You're not high. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel?
Okay, maybe you're a little high. The Marijuana Agenda is a listener-supported independent podcast brought to you by Radical Russ Media, LLC. Subscribe to our VIP feed at mjagenda.com for access to our ad-free podcast segment archive. Make a one-time donation to support the Marijuana Agenda at paypal.me/radicalruss. Now, in the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Marijuana Agenda presents this anti-drug public service announcement.
This is where I live most of the time. This is where I do what I do. And all the people I know making great music need all their brain cells to do it. Music is emotion, and you have to be your real self to feel your real emotion. Drugs have nothing to do with music, although people may try to make it seem like they do. The thing is, you can't reach your full potential if you take drugs. It's that simple. And that's why I don't.
Brought to you by MTV, RAD, and your local cable system.
This has been an actual anti-drug public service announcement. To combat this and other drug war hysteria, listen to the Marijuana Agenda every weekday at 3 p.m. Pacific at live.mjagenda.com or download the free podcast at mjagenda.com.
Hey everybody, it's Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
You're not high. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
This is high-purity THC content marijuana, and it's not a healthy substance.
Okay, maybe you're a little high.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, or NORML, is the nation's oldest drug law reform lobby. With chapters all across the United States and around the world, the local activists with NORML are on the front lines of the battle to end adult marijuana prohibition. Learn more now about the latest in marijuana activism in this edition of Freedom is Normal.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Freedom is Normal, where we take a look at the nation's oldest reform organization for marijuana laws, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And today, we are joined by the founder of the organization. Keith Stroup is talking to us from his home in Virginia. Keith, welcome back to the program.
Nice to be with you, Russ. I'm actually at the NORML office today.
Oh, you're in D.C. today. Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, I'm downtown D.C.
So it's been such a remarkable run in the 45 plus years that NORML's been in existence, beginning with the decriminalization that was passed in the 70s in numerous states. And now we've just achieved our first state to pass legalization through its legislature. And that's where I wanted to start our interview, Keith, is to get your perspective on where we're headed now, because we've kind of picked the low-hanging fruit when it comes to marijuana states, as far as the Californias and Oregons and Massachusetts, where we have the initiative power and we have a lot of control over how we're going to legalize. Now, as we move to these legislative states, we see examples like, well, Vermont, which is done like DC and had a no commercial sales sort of legalization. And then we look over to New Jersey, where they're proposing no home grow sort of situation, like what Washington state has. Do you think the arc of legalization gets more restrictive as we start passing in some and more of these states, or does the inevitable arc bend toward more freedom as more states become legal?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's the former, not the latter. First off, it's important for your listeners to realize that half of the states do not offer a voter initiative as an option for changing public policy. So it's important that we've reached this phase, and we certainly are there now. Vermont was the first state to legalize marijuana legislative instead of by the initiative. And as I say, the reason that's important conceptually is, of course, it opens up half the country that otherwise we can't legalize marijuana because they don't offer the initiative process. Now, what people have to be aware of, and you're going to see more and more of this, is that when you have to move a public policy proposal through a state legislature, it does in fact involve compromise, always. Even if you've got a fairly supportive majority in the legislature that favor legalization, there are going to be some reefer maniacs in that legislature, and there's going to be a governor now and then that gets cold feet, and like in Massachusetts, and wants to limit the legalization. So I think initially the first few states that we win legislatively, we're probably going to have fairly conservative versions of legalization. Like you mentioned, it may be more like Washington state, where they did not allow cultivation, than it would be like Colorado or California or some of the others. On the other hand, I don't think we should look at this as a single step. In Vermont, as you mentioned, what they actually have done is they've adopted a system that's almost identical to the one we have here in the District of Columbia. In D.C., our city council wants to license commercial growers and retailers, but the Congress won't allow it. They put a rider on our appropriations bill, and they do not let us, for the moment, legalize recreational marijuana in the sense that we can establish stores where people can go buy it. Now, we have 5 retail outlets for medical marijuana, but for some reason, they won't allow us to do it yet on recreation. So what that means is you're making a fairly strong statement that there's nothing wrong with smoking marijuana, and yet the people are going to either have to grow it themselves, which most people don't really have the expertise to do or don't want to spend the time to do, or they have to buy it on the black market. And I don't think that's a sustainable policy. I think in the long run, one of the major arguments in favor of legalization is to get rid of the black market, at least to minimize the black market, and to bring it above ground. But again, in Vermont, they didn't have the courage to do that. They simply legalized the possession and cultivation of marijuana, but they did not license commercial growers and sellers, so they have a system sort of like we do. Again, it's a magnificent major step forward, but it is not a sustainable long-term policy.
Which of the two options do you have more issue with, the no home grow or the no commercial sales? Which one's more troubling to you?
Well, I frankly have always felt that the right to grow your own marijuana is a terribly important concept, because what it does is, even though most of us who smoke may not choose to spend the time and energy to grow our own marijuana, just the fact that we have the legal right to do that assures that the market is going to be somewhat responsive to our needs. If they try to sell us marijuana, for example, that's not high quality, we're not going to buy it. We'll grow our own. If they try to charge us too much for the marijuana, we're not going to pay it. We're going to grow our own. So I guess what I would say, I would rather start off, if you have to make that choice, with the right to grow your own, because I'm reasonably comfortable that within 3 or 4 years, those elected officials are going to realize that, yes, legalization is better than prohibition, but full legalization, where you license commercial growers and retailers, is far superior to having your consumers depend on the black market.
You know, speaking of the black market, that's one of the angles that our opponents have seized on in the states that have legalized, is that a black market still exists, that it didn't get eliminated, although it may have been reduced. I haven't seen any specific numbers on that or anything. But in response to that, in response to these guys that say, you know, the big marijuana is coming, it's going to be big tobacco 2.0, it's addiction for profit, it's a commercialized addiction. How do you respond to that and convince the people that no, this is the way to go?
Well, for one thing, if you look at the first 4 states that have legalized and have a little bit of a track record, one of the common themes that run throughout those legalized systems is the price for legal marijuana begins to drop fairly dramatically. Even the first few months, it usually remains sort of at black market levels. But fairly quickly, it begins to drop, and drop significantly. In several of the states now, marijuana is less than half of what it cost before it was legalized. And again, it seems to be continuing to drop in price. That's a good thing, I think. That's not a bad thing. I think, we live in a free market system. I think what's important is that we avoid those type of legalization systems where they limit the number of producers or retail outlets. For example, in Florida, where I think they only initially started off with only 5 commercial growers were allowed to grow marijuana for the entire state for their medical system. Well, you can imagine that's a monopoly where those guys are going to take advantage of people. Whereas in states like Colorado, where they don't have a limit on the number of commercial growers or retail outlets, what happens is the free market over a period of time begins to work its will. Now, there will be some people who don't make it. In other words, the lure of the green rush can be a little bit of a fool's errand if you're not careful. I think everybody thought, we're legalizing marijuana, we're all going to get rich. No, in fact, a fairly significant number of those new businesses are likely to fail because there's a lot of competition. That's the way the free market is supposed to work. So, I feel badly for anybody who invested their money and then the business doesn't work. But again, I'd rather have the market determine how many people are in business than I would have the legislature limiting the number of licenses, because once you do that, then you have a monopoly and they obviously can set the price wherever they want.
Well, the perfect example of that happening is right up here where I'm at in the Pacific Northwest, particularly in Oregon, where we don't have any limits on total number of licenses for producers or retailers or processors. And the complaint I'm hearing from, a lot of people who've been in the marijuana business for a while, be it licit, medical, or illicit, the complaint is there's a glut. There's far too much production. They can't even get $500 a pound wholesale for their cannabis when they had been used to getting like around 2000. And this is even leading some to call for some policy changes, call for limits on licensing, calling for production caps or canopy limits. How do we talk to those people within our own cadre, within our own group of people, the cannabis community, that are seeing legalization as a threat to their economic livelihood?
Well, I think that is a legitimate concern that all of us should be paying attention to, and that is that we don't want to see the industry totally taken over by big marijuana. We don't want to have, multi-billion-dollar corporations coming in and controlling things. We want to make sure that those courageous individuals who for decades have taken felony risks to grow and supply marijuana to the millions of us who smoked when it was still illegal and still terribly dangerous for them to do that, we should reward them by making sure that they have a niche of the market that they can make a go of it, that they can stay in business but come above ground and pay taxes and be licensed. So one way you do that, the most creative thing I've seen so far in the California system, they actually adopted a proposal where for the first 5 years of legalization, they would have a limit of, I believe it's 1 acre of canopy for the largest grow operation anyone could have. Therefore, even if you had unlimited resources, you still could only have 1 acre of canopy, and therefore there was guaranteed that the small and mid-sized grower would be able to compete. And then at the end of the first 5 years, hopefully we'd take a look at it, and if they need a little more protection for a few more years, one presumes the legislature would provide that. But hopefully by that point, there are enough of those small and mid-sized producers that are doing well and have a healthy business, and they won't need the protection any longer. Now, having said that, the greed of the green rush always rears its ugly head, and already there's a problem in California with 4 or 5 fairly major players out there. Instead of being satisfied to have their 1 acre canopy of marijuana, they've taken advantage of a bit of a loophole in which there's no actual prohibition that says you cannot have more than 1 license. There is a clear intent that they didn't want people producing more than this acre of canopy, but they should have said, and nobody can have more than 1 license. So the result is you now have a number of the players, including some of the major players that we've known for years, like Harborside Health. I think they had like 11 different licenses now. And so they're avoiding the very control mechanism that the legislature intended to give the small and mid-sized producer a chance to have a place in the market. So again, we're always, in any time you're dealing with a new industry, you're going to have some people who simply get carried away with their greed, and we certainly have our share of that as well.
That's reminiscent of Oregon's medical marijuana program, where we had growers that were engaged in what was called card stacking, which was getting a whole bunch of patient cards for one address and then being able to grow 6 plants for every single one of those cards. And the blowback on that is still being felt today with restrictions on the medical program as far as how many plants they can grow, whether they can grow in the city, and so forth. Do you think there's going to be a blowback in California to these people that are, stacking these licenses as you described?
Yes, in fact, there's a lawsuit that has been filed. There's I forget now the precise name, but there's a growers association from California that has already filed suit alleging that what they're doing is precluded. And of course, we don't know how the suit's going to come out, but I'm certainly hopeful they're going to win that. And if they do, then at least we have this first 5-year period where the small and mid-sized producer has a fair chance to make it.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is brought to you by Cannabis Kamikaze, a professional licensed producer from Canada producing 3 pounds per light. Follow Cannabis Kamikaze on Twitter at Cannabis Kamikaze. That's at Cannabis, Kamikaze. Cannabis Kamikaze.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
No, Nelson, that's illegal. I can smoke this because I have cancer.
Learn more at MJAgenda.com. Today in the United States, 1 in 5 Americans live where adult access to cannabis is legal. Another 2 in 5 Americans live in medical marijuana states. But the government still claims there's no accepted medical use for cannabis in the United States, even after 20 years of medical marijuana in California. And they say we're the ones who can't think straight. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Health Cannabinoid, your ACMPR experts. Consultation services for medical cannabis. Visit healthcannabinoid.com or call 1-800-906-1383. That's www.healthcannabinoid.com or call 1-800-906-1383. Health Cannabinoid.
Total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I am ill. That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of
People don't smoke marijuana.
Radical Ranch.
Looking around the internet, I found a few different recommendations for policy, and I saw an op-ed the other day. I think it was Jonathan Calkins. I might be wrong on that, but he's been a long time researcher and analyst on these cannabis issues, and he's bringing forth this idea about the increased potency that we see in cannabis products these days, and the possible harms that might develop from that. Increases in dependence, for example, that he points to. When the Netherlands had an increase in potency, they saw an increase in cannabis dependence. When they ratcheted that down to a 15% limit, they saw a decrease in cannabis dependence problems. So he's actually suggesting something similar to what we see in alcohol, where, in the alcohol industry, they sometimes tax by proof. The higher proof liquors have a higher tax than just beer or wine. What would you think of a proposal to be setting potency limits or taxing cannabis products by potency, good or bad, unintended consequences? What do you think of that idea?
Well, my preference would be that we avoid getting into that and that we allow the market to mature a bit. Right now, we're not really sure what the consumers want. We know, for example, that there's a great deal more demand for edibles than anyone ever anticipated when the first couple of states were planning to legalize marijuana. And we know generally people tend to want fairly strong, good, high-quality marijuana. Now, in some ways, I do think it's like a beer or wine versus hard liquor. Most of us have learned, once we're old enough to drink alcohol, that you don't drink as much hard liquor as you might wine or you might beer. And I think that marijuana consumers need to begin to develop that same nuanced sophistication. If, in fact, you're smoking something that's 15% or even 20 or 25% THC, then obviously you shouldn't be smoking as much as you would have if you were smoking 10% THC. But the market is new enough that for most consumers right now, I think we tend to go in, if we're in a state where we have the luxury of a retail outlet, we go into the store and say, what's the best thing you have? When by that we generally mean, what's the strongest thing you have? I think we will get past that. I think we'll begin to find those areas where we're most comfortable, where we enjoy the quality of the high. And it's not the goal for most of us for getting high is not to be so stoned that you can't get off the sofa. It's to feel light, to enhance your appetite, improve your sex life. There's all kinds of benefits from a nice high, but it shouldn't be totally debilitating. And indeed, if you insist on smoking the strongest possible marijuana, then you've got to be especially careful that you don't drive for a few hours. With more ordinary marijuana, if you wait 60 to 90 minutes after you've last smoked, you're generally not going to be impaired. That doesn't mean there isn't some risk if you got pulled over that because you had THC in your system. In many states, most states, you could still be charged with a DUID even though they didn't demonstrate any impairment. But again, I'm not talking about the legal risk. I'm talking about the real risk. We don't want our own people driving on the highways and putting themselves and other people in danger simply because they underestimated the strength of their marijuana. So I think we need to make sure that the marijuana labeling is in fact accurate, that we know there's no molds or dangerous pesticides, and that we make sure we know the level of the THC and the CBD and that it's accurate, that it's been tested in a state-certified laboratory. If we have good information, then I don't think we necessarily need to impose a 2 or 3 tier tax system. Now, if that's what it takes to convince a state legislature to allow stronger marijuana, then okay, I could live with that. I'd rather have the choice of the different strengths of marijuana, even if I had to accept a different tax rate.
You know, it seems to me that banning higher potency marijuana or charging more for it is a weed dealer's wet dream. That sounds fuel the black
think
market.
You're right. Well, if you're not careful, what you do is you just send people back to the black market.
Yeah.
And, and by the way, on that, when we talked about that earlier, our opponents like to say, well, even in states like Colorado, you still have a black market. Well, there will always be a small black market. For Christ's sake, there's a black market for cigarettes in many states because of the high taxes on cigarettes in New York, for example. A pack of cigarettes is, $11 or $14 or something. Well, you can buy them down here in Virginia where I live for, $4 or $5. So you can imagine there are people who are smuggling cigarettes from the low-tax state to the high-tax states, even today. But that's only a real sliver of the market. Almost all tobacco is sold through legal channels, and I think the same thing will be true with marijuana. Our realistic goal should not be that there will never be any illegal marijuana sold in the state. That's just not realistic. But as long as we have the vast majority that's above ground and in a safe and regulated manner, we've achieved the result we're after.
You know, I think this brings up where two of our ideas kind of come at loggerheads when we're dealing with not just our opponents, but the states where we want to pass these laws. And on one hand, we're saying we want to pass marijuana legalization because you can tax it and you can get all this tax money for the state and do this great stuff with the tax money. But then on the other hand, we're saying we want to legalize to help eliminate a black market or reduce a black market. Well, obviously, the lower the tax is, the more black market you eliminate. But the lower the tax is, the less filthy money revenue the state gets. So how do we reconcile? Where do we find that sweet spot?
Well, I think you're right. That's what we have to look for, is that sweet spot where you partially satisfy both of those demands. I'll be honest. I don't think that the lure of new revenue is yet the major motivation for a state legislature to act. Now, once you have a majority of the legislature that have come to their realization that legalizing and taxing marijuana makes more sense over prohibition, then of course we begin to discuss, okay, what's a realistic level of tax that this state this size might anticipate? And do we want to earmark that for particular things? Like in Colorado, I think the first $40 million goes towards schools and teachers. And that is very appealing, politically, to be able to argue those things. But again, I think it's the real motivation for ending prohibition and substituting legalization is, number one, we stop treating responsible marijuana smokers as criminals. And number two, we have a market that's safe and regulated where the consumers have a right to know they're smoking a safe substance. And it's only incidentally about the tax. It's really about what's a fair system. Ultimately, the goal at NORML is we want responsible marijuana smokers to be treated fairly in all aspects of their lives. So it's not just that we want to be able to run down the street at a handy store and buy our marijuana. We also want to make sure that we don't suffer job discrimination, that we shouldn't be fired from our job simply because we have THC in our system. Of course, if they find that we're impaired on the job, then they have a right to fire us. But if we smoke on the weekend and then come into work on Monday, we're not impaired, and they should not be firing responsible marijuana smokers, but they are through most of the country today. Same thing with child custody, where they presume if you're a parent of a young child and you smoke marijuana, they sort of presume you're probably an unfit parent, and you have to prove the contrary. And, of course, with DUID, it's the same thing. We don't want marijuana smokers driving when they're impaired, but neither do we want marijuana smokers treated as if they're guilty of a DUI without any evidence that they drove while they were impaired. So we've got a lot of consumer, fine points that still have to be resolved before we have this whole legalization thing worked out. But it surely is nice to be at a place where we can begin to deal with these. Back when Prohibition was still in effect, if you would have said to a state legislator or a federal legislator, we want to make sure the marijuana is tested in a laboratory and properly and accurately labeled, they would have laughed you out of their office because it was contraband. So, of course, you couldn't make those demands. Today, in states where they have begun to legalize, we absolutely can make those requirements.
And the states are making some progress on this. As of January 1st, Maine became the first state to protect employment rights through their initiative. It went into effect January 1st, and you can't get fired or not hired because of marijuana metabolites. So that's some good news on that front. Let's take a look, move from the state angle now and get to the federal angle on this, because, of course, we've got a less than friendly administration when it comes to marijuana reform. We've got Jeff Sessions, an ardent drug warrior who pines for the Nancy Reagan Just Say No 1980s. And as I've been following this, I've been following on this story. Of course, the concrete action he's taken is in the rescinding of the Cole memo and other supporting memos like Ogden and Wilkinson that provided some veneer of protection for the legal states. But I'm also seeing a rhetorical shift in that, I guess it's two main things that I keep hearing from people like Jeff Sessions, Pete Sessions, who else was just recently saying this? Grady Judd, the sheriff that spoke the other day. And it's two things that I think they're trying to tie marijuana to the opioid crisis. One is where they say marijuana is the gateway drug; it leads to addiction, and then the other one is where they say there's fentanyl laced marijuana out there, which has never been proven. Are you worried about the federal response? Are you worried there's going to be a federal response, any sort of crackdown in the states?
Oh, I'm absolutely worried. So long as Jeff Sessions is the Attorney General. And by the way, the other day there was some rumors I read, I think it was in the Washington Post, that if Trump decided to get rid of Sessions, he would probably go back to Chris Christie, for Christ's sake. You know, those are the two biggest reefer maniacs in the entire country. So yes, I am indeed worried. I think that we are far enough along in terms of the change in attitudes that have occurred in this country. You know, we've got 5-6 surveys now that show 60% and higher public support for full legalization, not just medical use. So although it worries me that a Jeff Sessions might not care about public attitudes, he might just figure he can go in and shut down an industry and destroy a lot of businesses and basically throw a monkey wrench into any state's legalization system. He can't require the state to recriminalize marijuana, and they're not going to do that. So he can't get what he wants, is to go back to the old drug war. But if in fact they want to, they can certainly, as I say, throw a monkey wrench into the system, and they could set a state back for 2 or 3 years until we get rid of Trump and then get back on track again. I'm also, it makes me nervous when this whole opioid thing, because what Jeff Sessions said just in the past week was, he was giving a lecture someplace where when they asked him about opioids, he suggested people should just bear a little pain and take an aspirin. Yeah. I mean, this man is a goddamn idiot. You know, it's incredible that he would say that. And so the idea that what we think he should be doing would be legalizing marijuana, because we know that in states that have medical marijuana available, you have like a 30% decline in opioid deaths and by a 25% decline in opioid addiction. So we think legalizing marijuana is one of the answers to the opioid crisis. But of course, Jeff Sessions is never going to acknowledge that. He goes the other way and suggests that everybody starts with marijuana. That's where they begin to get into the drug scene, and they like to throw it all together. You know, I've been smoking marijuana for, I guess, 55 years or something. I think that's right now. And I've never even seen heroin. I don't know what it looks like. I mean, I read about it and I see pictures on the news. I've just never even been around the damn substance. And as I say, I've been smoking for more than half a century. So we need to get rid of these old ideas, but we're not likely to do that as long as Trump is in the White House.
Well, Keith, it's always wonderful speaking with you, and we, of course, thank you for everything you've done in founding NORML and fighting for the good fight for these past 45 years. As I let you go, though, one last question, and it just has to do with the direction we're headed, because one concern I have and some other people that I've spoken with have is kind of and maybe it's inevitable, but this change of marijuana going from being outlaw status to being a regular consumer good, and how that might affect our culture or our harmony, if you will. Back in the day when everybody was illegal, everybody shared the same joint in the same circle, whether you were black, white, straight, gay, rich, poor, y'all gathered in the circle. Where now I'm seeing, yuppie types with their vapor pens and the young kids with their dab rigs. And it just seems we've lost a communal aspect to this. And I don't know. What are your thoughts on the changing culture of cannabis as we move from prohibition to legalization?
Well, like you, I wish that we could retain all of the old sense of community. One thing about prohibition, because if you were going to smoke, you had to trust everyone you smoked with, because, what do you know? You don't know who's a narc, who's going to rat you out or whatever. So if you would go to a party and somebody would pass a joint around, all of you who shared that joint became part of a community. You had a common interest,
or really part of a conspiracy, if you phrase it right.
Yeah, that's right. From their standpoint, it was a conspiracy. From ours, they were helping us forge a community, and I always found that wonderfully supportive and invigorating. And I too would like to see as much of that to continue as possible. But I'm realistic enough to know that there will be a good bit of that cultural affectation we're bound to lose, because a lot of the newer people getting into it are only into it either for the money, they're jumping into the industry even if they don't smoke because they think they can make a lot of money, or for them, they never really lived through prohibition when they had to worry about being busted or thrown out of school or thrown into jail. So for them, it's just sort of it's another choice. It's like you want to go to a movie tonight, or you want to go down and use the rig and do some dabs, or, I don't think to them it has much to do with their general value system, where for us, it always has. Now, again, for a lot of us, marijuana legalization really means personal freedom more than anything else. I don't think the government has any business coming into our house to know what books we read, what music we listen to, how we conduct ourselves in the privacy of the bedroom, or whether we smoke marijuana or drink alcohol when we relax. It's simply none of their business. So for me, legalization is more about personal freedom, even though I'm a devoted marijuana smoker.
Yeah, and me too, Keith. We might just be some of the old OGs going off into the sunset on this one, considering that an adult who's now 21, buying their first legal joint in California, has never not known medical marijuana in that state. It's existed their whole life, so it's bound to change, I'm sure. Keith, thanks so much for everything you do, and we'll talk to you again soon sometime, and good luck on everything you're up to.
Good luck with your 420 Airbnb too, Russ.
Come by and visit sometime.
I'd love to. Bye-bye.
Bye. We sure hope we can get Keith Stroup here at Delta 9 House and Studios. It was great talking to my friend and mentor for all these years. And I don't know why the Liebermater is being mean like that, but we'll get that fixed. But thanks for joining us here for our first hour at the Marijuana Agendas. Shout out to Calico Castile, who was listening in the last hour. Wiz Calico out there with NCIA. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we'll have another hour coming up next. Toker Talk Radio. I've got a ton of stories. We're going to talk about Disjointed on Netflix and how it got canceled. Also, a look at the states of Virginia and Oklahoma. We got a follow-up on Joe Kennedy III and a look at Mexican cartels and how they're reacting to legalization.
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
For everyone here at Delta 9 House and Studios, I'm Radical Russ Belville. Thanks for joining us. Check me out at radicalruss.com. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.